then, welcome to episode number 9 of the Culture, Leadership and EVP podcast. We've travelled all the way to South Yorkshire today to meet with Chris, who is the CEO of JTL.
I am, yes. Good morning,
guys. Chris, introduce yourself.
Well, Chris Claydon. I'm the Chief Executive of JTL Training, and we're an apprenticeship training provider for electricians and plumbers.
Which is a break from the norm for us. We're normally sat opposite college leaders. So today we're sat with an independent training provider leader. And let's get to know you. So let's go. So how long have you been working at an independent training provider?
2 years now. Just literally over 2 years. I started the job in February 2 years ago. And prior to that, I'd been working in a related field, but not as an independent training provider. So it's my first go in this field. So
you started at the top job at one of the biggest training providers in the country.
I've got a lot of relatable experience from the past, which I think we should translate it across. But in effect, yes.
Yeah, okay. What an impressive go at it. So how long have you actually been a leader then in your career, not just at a training provider? How long have you been in charge?
Well, I started my route through the Army. So I started at the Army's Leadership College at Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, all the way back in 1982.
Not last week then?
Certainly not last week. So in many ways, my leadership training has been in development since I set foot through the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst grounds.
I'm trying to do some quick maths here, but that's sort of 40 plus years.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But how then, so forgive me, how did we go from what sounds like quite a long time in the Army into education and skills? What brought you to JTL, or related industries?
Yeah, I mean, I had a great career in the military and a full career. I was there for 33 years from start to finish. And then as I was coming towards the end of that career, I decided to leave a little bit earlier than I needed to go and start a second career. And looking around, where did I feel my experiences fit most? And for me, it was in the skills and training environment, because actually that's a lot of the military life. You're always developing new skills, honing those skills, refining those skills, and trying to impart skills to others. So I then moved into an organisation called the Engineering Construction Industry Training Board. I moved as the chief executive of that. It was around, again, about skills and standards for the process engineering industry, so oil and gas, nuclear, and those other fields. And then a couple of years ago, I was asked if I'd like to apply for this role, and I did, and was very lucky to be accepted into it.
Incredible. So the first jump to ECITB, that was intended as a foray into it. You took your skill set and thought, where is it going to be best applied?
Yeah.
How did you hear about that job? Was that a headhunt job? Did someone approach you?
It was, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
So you've been headhunted for the last 2 jobs, been chosen. Okay.
My only 2 civilian jobs.
Yeah. So a big jump. I hear quite often, very frequently, that the civilian life is very different to army life. Very, very different. There's nothing that can quite replace the camaraderie. So what's kept you in that jump into away from military life? Why are you still in training and skills?
You know what? It's surprisingly not that big a jump. Okay. The more senior you go up through the military, you get into other roles and jobs. And I spent 5 really interesting years working in the Ministry of Defence in various roles. But that is very much a mixed military-civilian environment. And actually, I've had quite a few experiences in that way. So actually, you can see the parallels. There are different ways of doing things, and you have to actually work on your leadership skills in some ways a little bit more in some areas to hone them. But very relatable across from the military to a civilian world, especially in something like skills.
So what keeps you specifically in skills? Is it the impact of what you have or what you see?
Absolutely. I mean, we deliver electricians and plumbers. This country needs electricians and plumbers. The economy hinges on having enough people to put the infrastructure in place to deliver all the changes, whether it's going green, whether it's building the economy further, whereas it's achieving all the goals that the government has set out, from house building through to all the major infrastructure projects. And being a part of that delivery supply chain is really, really motivating.
Because I definitely don't think anyone would buy a house or an office without water, toilets or lights. So if we haven't got electricians at a very core level, we can't finish anything. We're almost stuck commercially and domestically.
And that's just domestically. You look across the industrial and commercial. Hinkley Point at the moment is moving, which is, the new nuclear power station down in Bridgewater. Yes, I should remember that. I've been on the site a few times. But, they're moving into the engineering construction phase, which is turning a lot of buildings into a power station. The electrician demand alone on that site is enormous. I mean, well over 1,000 a day required on site to do the work. When you think of the absolute miles of wiring that needs to be put in place, all those control panels and boxes. So that's just one project. Then look across all those battery factories we want to produce, wiring up all those solar PV panels. Everything else we're doing, that requires an awful lot of input.
So other than the impact that your JTL has, are there any other reasons that you stay within
the people? It's really interesting how committed everyone I've come across in the skills environment is. They are absolutely dedicated to what they do, and they put a lot of time and they make sacrifices to do it as well. So, I see that real resonance back to my service days of people who are committed to what they're doing and doing a really professional job about how they deliver it, and really want the best out of it. So that is a powerful incentive to stay in this field.
And how does that translate in what you see day to day? So as you travel around your centres, as you go around JTL's partners and other places, how do you see that translate? What's the outcome for the learner? What's the outcome for the people?
You see that in the learner's achievements. Yeah. You see that when you see them, it's a 4-year apprenticeship, it's a long time. And a lot of them start 16, 17. And the 16, 17-year-old callow youth who kicks off is a very different person to the 21-year-old at the end of their apprenticeship. And, I interview a lot of apprentices as I go around. I often get the chance to meet parents and employers and talk to them about the development. And how often you hear that story when they arrived, that, in the class, they weren't particularly focused. They had to be kicked and pushed to do things. But by the end of the journey, they're really dedicated, focused electricians looking forward to their job. And the people who've turned them into that are those tutors and assessors who've worked with them. They have put their time and effort, recognise that journey that person's going on, recognise how they need to work with them to motivate each individual who is very different to get to the end of that apprenticeship journey. And it's a tough journey to become.
It's a huge thing at the moment. We are seeing behaviours be the forefront of every question I'm getting when someone's saying, I want to talk about a new role, I want to get into education. They go, yeah, but the kids, they're awful. And if you find the right people, you've got the right amount of time. Most people are on a programme for a minimum of a year. You can see such huge change in a year from someone at 16, 17, 18. And that ability to impact that life so quickly. And you're seeing that across your organisation. That's impressive.
And I'd say some of the behaviours are awful, but the people are intrinsically the same as they always were. Good people. And, we had this debate when I was in the military for many years. The young people coming in, they're not the same. You know what? They're just as courageous. Yeah. They've got just as many values. But you need to apply the training and put a value set and a training system around them that enables that to come out and for them to show that. And I've seen very young people join the military, again, very feckless, not always great to begin with, but you see them on operations and the bravery they've displayed. And you come back into this field and you see these young people who started, some of them probably kicked into it by the parents, if we're honest. They come out at the other end as something very different. And I love to see that.
Because they work on such big projects. If you look at Hinkley Point, we're building a nuclear power station. That's not a small job. We've got some of the largest solar sites in the UK. You've got massive battery storage. They're working on huge projects.
All those wind farms and all that high voltage power which needs to be managed as well, and the network upgrades that need to follow on from using all these dispersed ways of generating electricity.
Which would scare me.
Yeah.
Right? And imagine a 16-year-old kid walking out going, what? You want me to go and do that? And I've got to be a part of this huge project. And it's so critical. I think I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. Yeah, fixing behaviours.
It is, and it's scary. And that translation from being at home and being at school and the familiar to your first day on site, and it could be cold, wet and rainy, and you're on there with a whole load of strangers and you're the young, you know nothing, it's quite a jump for a lot of people to make, and it is quite scary. And that's before you get onto the massive projects that surround that.
So in your opinion, JTL and its people and its impact prepares people for working life?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, okay. What advice would you give to someone, not from your background, maybe not from your background, that wants to get into education and skills?
I think it's a really good place to work. I think it's immensely rewarding. And I think if you think and look back at your own career, you can see examples of where you've been involved, and for most people, that you've done something which has helped develop people, which has applied skills that you've learned, and you've passed those skills on. So where's the relevance of what you've done? I think a lot of people will find that relevance. Then you've got to think of the value and the interest it brings. This is a really impactful area to work in. You're transforming people's lives, and we've discussed a bit of that already, and we really are transforming people's lives, but we're also transforming the economy. The need for skills in this country, I think, has been, we went through quite a long period where the focus is on university. Everyone had to go and do higher education. We were going to get to this fantastic economy by everyone going to university. That's where the focus went. That's where the money went.
For a long time.
And the rest of the people were sort of forgotten. All those institutions that developed and trained, prepared people for other types of training, sort of withered to a degree. There's now been a refocus on skills, which is really great to see. And, they are vital. The recognition, I think, dawning recognition that university is not the be-all and end-all. That actually you need these skilled people where good money can be earned to deliver everything we need as a society. And, the wealth of this society depends on these skilled people.
This is an interesting question. So you've gotten into education skills, but what do you think the biggest misconception is that people have of entering into this space?
It's a really difficult question to ask from my perspective.
Well, one of the things was behaviours, right? Everyone always goes, the kids are going to be awful, the students will be terrible. But I don't think...
I think they think it's a repetitive, dull job, maybe, that you're just a classroom-based teacher.
How wrong they would be.
And it's absolutely not that. Yeah. And I think until you get into the skills, education, teaching environment, it's really hard to understand the reward you get, the satisfaction you get from helping someone develop and really achieve something at the end of their training. So I think one of probably the biggest misconception is they think back to their school days and just think of the dry, dusty teacher giving them a dry, dusty subject and it's all a bit dull. And it's absolutely not that. It's a much more dynamic environment now, and I think the rewards are with it.
Because I see a lot of that. I go, do you want to get into teaching? They go, what? Why would I want to teach English? And you're thinking, no. Why? Like, we've just been for a tour around this brand new purpose-built centre. And what we've got here is hybrid classrooms. Yeah. So we have both workshops at the rear of the classroom. Then we've got seating and a smart whiteboard and a proper classroom space so that we can get them straight into the practical application of the theoretical lessons.
Yeah.
But most people would think, right, classroom teaching, lots of textbooks, lots of coming in, talking about English and maths. But yes, English and maths is core to quite a lot of curriculum delivery. But at the same time, we're actually training people for the real working world.
Yeah.
So they're coming in and doing a proper, well, almost like for like, right? Some of those classrooms are modelled on what would happen out on site.
Absolutely. All the tasks they undertake are tasks they'll do in the real world. And it's really important for the learners and for us to let them see that what we teach them is what they're going to do. And therefore the academic bit is important, but actually they get the importance of that as the course goes and the training goes on. And some of the academic side, the maths and science, does get quite technical during the course of that apprenticeship. And if we faced the brand new learner, age 16, 17 with that, they would probably tilt, fall over, leave, stop doing it, say, it's not for me. But because of the point you make there, it's the practical application. Then they see the need for the maths and science. Then they get into it and really, understand why it's needed and can see the practical use of it, and they get that demonstrated. So it's not a dry and dusty academic thing. It's absolutely focused on their job.
Yeah, no, we talk a lot about contextualised resources, which I'm sure JTL have mastered. So what's the biggest difference then, in your opinion, between a college and an independent training provider?
Independent training providers tend to be a lot more focused. As a result, they can be a little bit more agile. Colleges do a great job, and they've got a difficult job to do. They deal with huge numbers across a wide range of different training courses. JTL is a great example of an ITP. We're very focused. All we do are 2 types of apprenticeships: electrical and plumbing. People come here into a professional work environment. They do their work and they go and back to their employer, and then do the rest of their week if they're on block release, the next 2 weeks back with their employer to then come back and gain the next set of knowledge units. It's a fantastic environment for which to work in and to learn in, and we see that progression through. So I think a key part is the environment we can create, because we have the freedom to. I think there's a big downside of the way we have a split between colleges and independent training providers, is it's not a level playing field where it comes to funding. Colleges get capital funding from government to provide facilities. They also get preferential treatment when they bring in new tax laws, for example. They get national insurance relief, and that sort of thing goes on. We don't.
Because you didn't see that. We didn't see an increase in the funding bands for RTPs, did we?
And we haven't seen, effectively, within the electrical funding, there has been no increase since 2017. But every other cost has gone up. And there was a small increase 30%. A couple of years ago, but that actually came with a lot more content. So it was an increase. It was, the increase actually matched the content delivery required. So it's put us under tremendous strain to deliver, and it's expensive. You look at someone like JTL. Our employer base is predominantly small and micro businesses. Now that's a target group for the Department for Education and for the government more widely, which is great. But it's more expensive to deliver to small and micro businesses than it is bigger businesses. It takes more effort, more time, but there's no funding for that for us. So we are delivering fantastic outcomes, and they are generally higher than elsewhere in the electrical and field. I mean, we've got the achievement rates which show that our input market share of learners every year is about 29. Well, last year was 29.3% of all electrical learners started their training with JTL. That same year, our output market share was 33.7% of all completers. So we've added value. And I would say, with so many independent training providers, and in our case, we're also a not-for-profit, we're tremendous value for what we do. We do our output's better than our input. So
in synopsis, if we're talking about the key differences, we've got some big disparities in the amount of funding we're provided with. We've got some big disparities in our capital, so our facilities that we can put on. We have to fund that through our apprenticeship, the fee we charge for our apprenticeship. But also then we get some more, as an ITP, you get a bit more negative tax treatment. We're not funded in those areas. Interesting.
And did you know what percentage of apprentices are trained by independent training providers? It's 70%.
I was going to guess sort of 60, but 70 is higher. Okay.
So 70% of all apprentices, not necessarily in the electrical and plumbing fields, but 70% of all apprentices are trained by independent training providers. So why would you discriminate against your biggest training provider base for vital things you need doing? It's sometimes it's really hard to fathom, and we have those discussions.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to quote a Conservative Party line, which was a high wage, high skill economy. We're obviously under a new government at the moment who have a different skills agenda. I'm not sure if I'm entirely up to date on what that is, and I don't know if anyone else is at the moment, but I know for a fact that everyone is saying that growth is at the core of what we need to be doing, and it sounds to me like JTL's delivering that.
And we're seeing some really good announcements by the government. We just now need to see some tangible actions that fall out of those announcements, which will benefit our sector and parts of our sector. And those have yet to materialise, but we'll see.
What is your proudest moment within skills and training?
It's really hard to pin down because there have been so many things I've looked at, felt proud about, and looked at learners' achievements and thinking, wow, we as an organisation have helped them get to that, as they've won a national award or just got through from a very difficult start. But I think probably for me, it was being appointed as Chief Executive of JTL. And being able to head up an organisation that is an intrinsic part of this country's supply chain to ensure we can achieve net zero, build those houses which need to be built, and all those other major infrastructure projects. A
real engine of the growth of the economy, and being at the lead of that allows you to impact all of those learners and also your employees' lives. I know we're going to talk a little bit about what JTL stands for its employees, but I see a lot of very positive employee-led experiences coming from JTL. So that brings me really neatly on then. The part of this podcast is about culture, leadership and EVP. The segment we're on now is culture. So tell me a little bit about JTL's values and its culture. Do you have a set of values? How do you... We have a set of values. We have 4 values which we really work on, and that's particularly internally with the staff. So respect and professionalism, responsiveness, those are all intrinsic to how we want to operate as a team to deliver the training. We work with those values with our learners. But, you see them on a day release, 1 day a week. There's so much you can impart in there. But it's also then how you treat that person more broadly than that 1 day a week into the training centre. It's how you treat them in your assessment, in how you onboard them, how you treat them throughout that apprenticeship journey, chivvy them when they need chivvying, but doing things the right way. So yes, we do. I think the values we stand for, and one thing I've really looked at hard as I came into this job, was quality. And it sounds odd as quality isn't a value, but to try and deliver the best possible outcome for learners and ensure that they're safe in the workplace, they can work effectively, and that they're prosperous and set up well for the future. We've got to have the best quality of delivery that we can possibly have. So it's not about getting the most people in. I said earlier, we are the biggest single train provider in electrical and plumbing. Yes, we are that. But that's not an aim. That's a byproduct of where we've got to. Our aim is very much to be the best quality training provider in those fields across England and Wales, where we currently work. Sounds like that's your purpose then, is to provide the best quality. That is definitely a purpose. Training. It's the I think your headline is slightly different, but the overarching, maybe the mission at the minute, the never-ending mission is to deliver that training to a high standard, and then we grow organically from that. That was one thing I noted, right? We don't necessarily have a business development team within JTL. It's done by being very, very good at what we do. That's the main aim, right? We focus on quality and the rest comes. I've got a large sales team, but they're the assessors, the training officers, who are out on site doing their assessments, doing professional development with the learners actually in the workplace. And it's that being seen which generates business. And generates core business. It's also our achievement rates. I'd like to think that, we have good achievement rates. I always said that really good salespeople would make really good teachers because they come in with that passion and that energy and that ability to communicate. So if you can encapsulate that within a really professional, intelligent instructor that understands their trade, who can then communicate effectively with an employer, a learner, colleagues, you will create an environment that is conducive to growth and to quality outcomes. So I think you've managed to nail that one. Did you go and have to identify these values, or were they existing within JTL and you've then become to embody them? I work with JTL
to develop the values.
Okay.
So, when I got here a couple of years ago, things weren't necessarily as on track as they should have been within the organisation, and we needed to make some changes. And part of that was to consult. I consulted very widely with employers and a whole load of industry bodies who have an interest in JTL and what we do. But also I consulted with the staff, because that's where the knowledge is, all those people, those work colleagues. And we've got a lot of long-serving work colleagues in JTL, which is testament to their dedication. But consulting with them to understand and really get those root core values which we could all sign up to. So we worked together to develop them, and a restructuring plan. What did we need to achieve? And then we've gone out and we've got that work underway. And we're a long way down the line, but inevitably there's still a way to go as well. These things don't happen overnight. Change, you can make some headline changes quickly, but the really deep cultural changes, and, they take a bit longer than that.
A bit longer is probably an understatement. And I think it's almost a constant work in progress, because I asked someone the other day to define culture, and they kind of looked at their hands and went, what is culture? And I think the best explanation I've been given is that it is a set of values and then those enacting behaviours. So when you say, what is my culture? Well, I don't have one, but I do have a way that we are supposed to behave, a way that we expect people to behave, and some values that then intrinsically go for that. So did you manage to distill that down to 4 values, or did it start? Normally it starts with a long list.
Oh, it starts with a much longer list,
yeah.
and people want lots of things in. I just think it's very difficult to deal with a big long list.
Yeah.
It was certainly difficult for me. So it needed to be a pretty short list, and we distilled it down to that core essence of those values. I mean, it is a difficult thing. And what is culture? I think from my perspective, it's when you behave automatically according to your values. That's your default behaviour.
Interesting.
You're genuinely living your values. You're not having to think about your values and say, "Oh, I better do that."
Because it's written on a wall behind my head. I need to remember that.
Yeah, you just do it. That you do have that respect for people in the right way, that you are professional, that you are responsive. It's you absolutely get into your values, and then you sit back and think, yeah, I am doing that. And to me, underlying all that is a leadership culture that I'm trying to instill within the organisation. I think, as ever, you go in that sine wave of ups and downs in a longer lived institution. And I really want people to own their leadership. And I just want nice people to lead. That doesn't mean people haven't got mettle and they can't make difficult decisions or have difficult conversations. But, there's a way of respecting people, again, living your values, treating people, maintaining that approach. And good leadership is intrinsic. You've got to look at your leadership first and how you lead and how the organisation leads before you can start calling out what you might perceive as poor behaviour elsewhere. Because it all comes from that.
Black.
There was that saying I had in the military, there's no such thing as a bad soldier, just a bad officer, because they hadn't brought that person on. And it always sticks in the back of my mind, think about that. It's about how do you lead people properly to ensure that we can get the results we need.
And that's why people stay at organisations. That's why people thrive at organisations, because they're given that right level of investment. So how do you then embed your values and then support them within your organisation? What are the key things that you do?
I think a lot of it is around communication. It's being visible as a leader and getting out and talking to people and constantly talking to people. So I spend a lot of my life, generally speaking, 3 days out of 5 on the road, going around training centres, talking to my instructors, talking to the learners while they're there, visiting employers in their workplace as well. And I think imparting values, again, is living it, is getting out, talking to them, and listening to what people have to say, because there's an awful lot of good ideas out there. And when you're trying to do those problem-solving exercises, well, what are the people facing the problems actually saying about how it could be done? So, yeah, I think get out, speak to people, work with them, listen to what they've got to say, and evaluate it. But if you're not going to do it, I did say this from the beginning when I got here, when we were doing the restructuring, I said, I'm going to consult you all in everything. But I'm going to make some decisions at some point. You're not all going to agree with my decisions because that's the way life is. But you're all going to know why I've made a decision. We'll have had a debate about it, but at the end, a decision's going to be made. But it's important for people to recognise, that they've been heard, they've had their say. It doesn't always work that everyone's say, gets put into practice. Yeah. But I think people, as long as they've been listened to and they've contributed, then you can start from there as a really good way of taking things forward.
Because that's a skill. A skill is to go out and make someone feel heard. It's not just listening. Everyone's got not everybody, but most people have got 2 ears. They can hear exactly what you're saying, but it's what you then do to make people feel heard, recognise their input and what their contribution is, and then still make the right decision for the organisation. Because that's what's important. The organisation overall, right? That's what the values exist to support, and the in this case, it's the quality of the provision. But if you don't hear people and you just act, the outcomes for that can be quite devastating, as we've seen over time.
Yeah.
JTL is quite a vast organisation. We've got 17 training centres, I'm sure more in the pipeline. How does your culture differ from centre to centre?
Yeah, well, it's not a monolithic culture because we are a national provider in England. We also provide in Wales. It's under a slightly different model there under the Welsh government, and devolution is another thing which we're not picking up, so I won't go down that rabbit hole. But we want to offer the same high quality product across all of our training centres. But actually every region is different. And it's different because the employers work in different fields in different regions. Some have because regionally that's how the economy is made up. Some are national employers. That's why we've got to have the same product across all of our training centres. But the people in each training centre are different. We're in South Yorkshire today. Well, guess what? The trainers, the instructors, the managers here are of a different nature than perhaps I'd find down in Birmingham, or I will find where I was yesterday down in our training centre in Maidstone. So you take into account those differences. But I think what we all sign up to is the same values and the same aim. And as long as we are all working towards those same values and that same aim with a common curriculum to deliver, actually we embrace the difference between the regions and their different ways of doing things.
Because it's the way it feels, right? We walk into the centre and instead of offering me a coffee, they offered me a cup of Yorkshire tea.
Yeah.
Very specifically, it was Yorkshire tea. That's the very small difference. But if we go into places with a uniform mentality, we fail to meet the employee and the learner where they are. And we can almost ostracise people by not recognising those subtle differences. But by having that guiding principle at the top, by saying, yes, we know who you are, this is where we're trying to be, we kind of take the organisation as it is where it needs to be, right?
Yeah.
And if I were to ask your staff, so if I was to go out and ask them what the values were, do you think on the bulk that your staff could recite the values of JTL?
I think they could, yes.
Yeah. And why do you think that is?
I think they buy into them. They understand the values, that intrinsically they believe in the values. They do live them as well.
So if I asked the same question but for students, do you aim your values at students as much as you aim them at staff? Or do you think the students would know the feeling of the value?
I think the students, if you then quiz them about how they're treated, would then recognise the values. But would the students know our values? No, they wouldn't.
No. Okay.
And nor would we expect them to. But we expect to treat them within those values, and the period they're with us and we train them over, that they acquire those values.
And then the feeling of it, right?
And they see it, the respect for people, is really important in your place of work. No matter what the job you do, having respect for other people and their voices and, and changing that culture in the on-site, and all those areas come from intrinsically from respect as one example, or professionalism another, being the best electrician you can be. So I think they absolutely live the values. They're taught the values by us. They're taught them by their employers as well, and they acquire them, and you see them on that journey getting there.
But first and foremost, we make sure our staff understand and live and breathe our values through strong onboarding, bringing the right people through the doors?
Yep.
Okay.
Really important to get the right people through the doors, and and having that relationship we have on the recruitment is a really important part of that, to making sure we get the right throughput of staff. Now, where we need to find those additional staff.
Well, I remember the start of that conversation, which was a values-based employer with a values-based recruiter, and having that, I think we sat and talked for about 2 hours about what your plan was for JTL, what JTL was. And then I talked a little bit about how Dovetail would help that. And in this relationship, I think something that was really important to me is that we're looking for the right type of person. I think you were really clear that you would hire the person that had the skills if they didn't have the educational experience, but they had the right attitude, the right culture, basically. It's the right person to walk through the door. So we spent a lot of time understanding that, and then understanding each centre and its differences. And again, I recognise we came in today, I think it was Howard, and Howard's Yorkshireness strikes through the door, right? But if we go into your Kent centre, we go anywhere else, we see a different style of leader, but they all have the same embedded values, and they will all invest in the right people as long as they share that same common purpose. So we've seen that. That's taken some time. And how do you think other education leaders, would you give them any advice on how they could embed their values?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it comes back to how to embed those values is your personal leadership. It's not enough to say we've got a list of values. You've got to personally demonstrate them, and then you've got to be visible as a leader. And it's very easy to get tied up by the myriad of paperwork and papers and conferences and phone calls that you have to make as a leader, and sit behind a desk and come in, work behind your desk and finish your day there. But you've got to free yourself from that to a degree and get out and talk to people, because you've got no idea whether your values are landing unless you speak to people, but see people, not your immediate leadership team, but actually you've got to get right through the organisation and speak to, I visit my administrative centre, which is at Wrexham, as often as I do training centres, because they're really important.
They are the engine of your organisation.
They're a hub, and they have an interface with both my, all the rest of the colleagues in JTL, and the learners and employers, and they do a vital job. They are absolutely a vital cog to what we do, and it means you've got to invest time to go and talk to them and support them and listen to their challenges.
Can I fire a question in then? So what you're talking about here is visible leadership in the physical.
Yeah.
But I happen to know that you have a communications expert on your SLT.
Yeah.
So do you think there is a hybrid of visibility that is both in the physical and in your communication networks throughout the organisation? And what sort of value do you place upon that?
Yeah, no, very high value. I mean, I do regular vlogs, at least monthly, where, I'll give a summary of what's going on and, some of the issues, congratulate people, highlight policy changes, all of those sort of things. So there's multiple different, and visible leadership's not me, it's all the leadership. I don't want leaders who don't get out and lead.
Yeah, don't want them sat behind the desk. They need to be walking around the centre.
They need to go and see people, because people then approach them and speak to them. And a really good example is my Director of Financial and Corporate Services. You could have, in that role, see someone behind a desk, especially dealing with some of the very challenging financial issues. But, she really does make time to go and work from different training centres, to go and see people from there and get out and about and visit. What's going on.
Yeah, no, I know. I've met Gillian several times.
And it's the same with Claire, who's now is my operations director. She's always out and about and travelling.
So your values are then lived by your senior leadership, who then live it into their management team, who then bring it into the organisation, right? It's a top-down approach.
You've got to be accessible to people, haven't you, to convince them, especially when you're going through a period of change. and people are uncertain.
So who's in charge then of culture at JTL? Who sets the tone?
I do.
Interesting.
But I'm not in charge of culture, because I think, I would say the leadership team buy into the culture. I think the staff buy into we all buy into the culture, but, who leads it? Well, you've got to lead it. If you're the leader of the organization and you don't lead the culture, then how can you expect anyone else to do it? So I've got to be seen to be living the culture for them to buy into it and say, that's how we should do things.
Be prepared to run over the hill, not just tell others to go over the hill.
Yeah, absolutely. It's leading from the front.
Yeah, leading from the front. There is times where you can lead from the back, and you do have to push people forward.
Yeah.
But I think the best expression I've ever had in management is, don't ask others to do something you wouldn't do yourself. And I think that lives, and that's where you see culture go to die, right? When you see people going, well, you go and do that and I'll do this.
But on that basis, certainly don't ask me to wire up a photovoltaic panel, because the result wouldn't be very pretty.
Yeah, okay, right. And I certainly wouldn't want to be out there teaching electrical. So I guess it's about understanding the role that they do and being comfortable to get involved where you need to. And how do you have a system in place that measures whether culture is changing, improving within JTL? Is there metrics that you use to look at that? Yeah,
and that they're not particularly well defined at the moment. I think a lot of it is temperature. I work very much on the basis that I've got an open door policy. So, and so do the other senior leadership team members. So I regularly get emails, actually often from learners as well, but also directly from colleagues across the business. If there's something is bothering them and they want to approach me, they feel they can approach me and do. And the more of those emails I get, perversely, the better I think the culture is, because people feel that I'm approachable enough that they can approach me directly and they'll get a response, and I'll work with them on that. They're not scared to tackle me directly.
Is that something that's really interesting. Is that something you've put into onboarding? Is it printed on a sign somewhere?
No.
Is it part of a CEO's introduction?
It's what I say to people.
When you meet them in the first
we've just had a series of national conferences, and we've done it by region this year, and that's how we will continue to do it, because it works well. And there's a small team of us who go around each region, and we have a day's conference with all all of the JTL colleagues from that region, mixture of different roles. And with those, and on my vlogs and all my communications, I do say to people, talk to me directly. Gillian says the same, Claire says the same. And that's not to subvert a management structure. That's really important. And, that people use the management structure. But sometimes people have something they want to say. And I absolutely encourage that if they want to speak to me directly. I think it's important that people feel they have access. What you don't want is a culture of pervading where people feel the only person they can talk to is the next person up. It's not always appropriate to do that.
It's a really important balance to strike. It's something that I've always said, which is, look, if there's a problem, I want to know about it. If it's an operational issue, if you've got a day-to-day, run-of-the-mill issue, yeah, please, of course, follow the structure, speak to your line manager. If you think something's not right and something's broken, or you've got some insight, or you've heard something that you want to check or challenge, you could absolutely email me and let me know the problem or the issue. But I don't want to be drawn into day-to-day operational squabbles. And I've always been really clear with my team that a day-to-day, please go to the right people. But if ever there is a bigger problem, drop me an email. And it could be a quick one-liner. You can just say, Guy, I've got this issue with this piece. No problem. And then we'll explore and we'll talk about it. But it's that not that physical open door, but that ability to communicate with me at any level in something that is pertinent to them is critical.
And I think what comes out of that culture that you bring in is the ability for people to highlight a problem before it needs to be a whistleblowing problem, or if they think there is something going wrong somewhere, they don't put a lid on it for a long time. It comes out sooner. It's a healthier organisation which feels it can be open and can talk.
Yeah, totally.
And you're going to get away from you take less risk as an organisation if you're open and people can talk.
You can solve problems quicker by just having a quick conversation. I can tell you that for a fact.
Yeah.
Okay, so we move into the second, almost penultimate segment, and this is all about what JTL offers to its employers. So I call it employer value proposition, call it whatever you want. It's why people work at JTL. So what are the three main benefits that you think JTL offer?
I think the first one is all about our workplace and what we've been talking about for a little while now, the cultures within it. They know we deliver a good professional product. The environment in which they deliver that from with our training centres is absolutely focused on delivering the learner throughout that end-to-end journey, and it's a great place to work. And we know that from people who've worked in other areas and in other environments. When they've come to JTL, they always comment on what a great place it is to work. So I think that's a really important factor. I think probably one of the most important factors. The second is we pay a very fair salary. We market test, we get out, we make sure that we reflect the right values, to make sure that people can properly have a productive life and live a good life. So we pay good salaries. And then I think the third area, well, it's that interest in our people again. So yes, there's a salary, but how do you invest more broadly into the individuals to make sure they are healthy and productive at work, that they can tackle some of the things that life throws at them. And part of that is, we have a salary sacrifice scheme for cars so that people can access, green vehicles. And I think a lot find that interesting. And I think another really interesting or a big part of the package is, if people get ill, and people do, we want them to get better quickly, get the best help they can. So we offer private healthcare to individuals to make sure they can get well quickly and then get back into the workplace quickly as well. And we find that's a very useful benefit.
It's one of those benefits you don't
supports
want.
People. It's definitely a benefit you don't want.
Yeah.
But, we all know that people get ill. We've had people who've gone through long-term cancer care and other areas, and this is all kicked in and provided them the support they need. And in some cases, sadly, with cancer, it's a terminal issue, and it supported them through to the end. So it's I don't know, it's an underlying reassurance for someone, and when they're in that workplace.
And it sounds like a package of benefits and offerings that have been shaped by really strong employee feedback over time. I don't think you suddenly woke up one morning and said, I'll give them all private healthcare. It sounds to me that as you've looked at the workforce in a holistic way, you've started to engineer an environment through the centres, through a salary space, and then through a benefits package that meets your workforce's needs as it needs to be, right?
And we're looking to further expand that into other areas. A lot of people have deep interest in charities and charity days, and how do we support them, while they have charity days where they can go and work for a charity of their choice for a few days a year, but, not to have to take annual leave to do it. So there's the range of benefits. We have a working group drawn from across all of our colleagues in JTL, which are working on a range of benefits which can just make that work-life integration even better than it is. And we've got so many dedicated people who put the hours in to do the work, and how do we then support them in the round? And that's what we're really looking at doing.
I don't think you talked enough there about the focused work environment, if I'm really honest. I've just walked we're in the centre in South Yorkshire. As I've walked in, I'm walking in not into a brand new building, but feels like a clean and focused work environment. But I've got state-of-the-art equipment. I've got brand new working bays. Everything is kept in working order. It feels like a place where both a student and an educator can become almost symbiotic. They are here to learn. They're here to teach, and the environment is really strong. And when you talked about it then, I just don't think you pushed it across enough how much JTL invests in keeping its centres up to date and focused.
Yeah, and it is having the right platform on which to deliver the excellence in teaching is a really important part of what we do. And you want people to, when they come in, you want them to clock in almost. You want them to focus. It's swish of mindset. Now you're leaving that aside. You're walking through the doors. You're coming into this training centre. We want you to really knuckle down and focus. And if we give you the environment in which to do that, if we give you the equipment with which to do that, if we give you the instruction, the teaching with which to do that, we know we're going to get the best output. So you're absolutely right. We have whilst every region is different, and even within a region, things vary. Actually, our training centres are uniformly of a high quality,
yes,
and are very properly and carefully maintained. Not just because we want and we must have safe working environments, but actually because we want the standard of environment to inspire the people who come in and work there.
Yeah. I think that was about I think that covers off the bit I was trying to get across, because I think it's not trivial.
No, it's not.
The investment in these centres and into your people is not trivial. I think that should be celebrated. Beyond salary then, and material benefits and beautiful centres and private medical, what does JTL do for its employees that makes JTL so special?
That is a tough one, because we've talked about so many of those things, but I think it is that focused environment of what we do.
Yeah, making it more about the learner, just solely
Absolutely.
focused on their outcomes and really giving them a sense of purpose in their contribution towards that as well.
And, we try and invest. So we invest in the material structure to do that. We also invest in the individual. We talked about some of the other packages, but in upskilling and CPD, and that's also very important. We've just, for a lot of our tutors have just gone through a level 5 upskilling program,
yep.
and really successfully. They've done brilliantly well. It's investing in people to equip them and for the future,
to produce a better outcome,
and to do that better outcome.
Okay, so in your experience, then, is that why people join JTL?
Yeah, people come to us that we've got a reputation and a name. And that's been built on the back of really great quality delivery delivered by really great quality people. And that's attractive. We are successful in what we do. Employers like what we do, and people want to be a part of that.
And that's probably the same reason then that people stay, because they've joined this environment. It's well managed. It's consistent, right? I can't imagine you're changing things. The model of JTL works, so it stays in place. So you can come and expect.
Well, absolutely. The model we have recently developed is the one that will stay. We've had to change the overall operating model of JTL. I mean, we talked earlier a bit about the difference between colleges and ITPs, but, when JTL was formed 30 years ago by the Unite the Union and the Electrical Contractors Association coming together, our model there was that we subcontracted the teaching element to FE colleges, and we did all the wraparound services and the assessment and recruiting and onboarding, etc. And that model's had to change because it's not supportable anymore.
So obviously JTL's been through a period of change, and you've been the orchestrator of that change. What's that big focus been about for you?
Well, it is that change to more focusing on that quality of delivery. JTL went through a period of expansion and growth. And I think when I came in, I recognised there was a need very much to change direction, less concerned about growth. Growth's important. We need the people. But actually the quality of delivery is the most important thing we can do. And improving the achievement rates and getting those up as they are to, class leading levels. So yes, a period of change, and we're still in it because no change, happens overnight. It takes a little while to it through. All the big changes done, it's really just embedding some of those processes and procedures, and we're seeing the results of that. And I think people recognise that. I think our colleagues all recognise that, the benefit of that, and they're enthused by it as well. And that's really important.
I think sustainable growth is really important. I was with an FE leader a couple of weeks ago, and I talked about having growth positions within boards of institutions, and she said to me, "Yeah, growth, great. Sustainable growth, perfect. There is no point in growing at any cost, because there is a cost to growth." And she was very clear that actually in building a good quality-driven organisation, sustainable growth was at the core of what we did. So I guess that's the shift is actually, yes, we can continue to grow, but only if our quality metrics are in the right places.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've got to get that baseline. We've got to really nail that down. And growth will come. I think that the challenge for me is in growth actually is not necessarily demand. I think demand is there. For me it's the capital funding side of it. We discussed that earlier, but we don't get capital funding, and I'm a charity. As a not-for-profit, it's where does that capital funding come from? And that's the challenge.
Does anyone want to donate any centres to JTL?
Well, if any of those metro mayors out there who want more electricians and any of those, those regions who see the need for more, then we need to talk about a partnership.
If you can improve one area then of what you offer your employees, what would it be?
I would like to accelerate the pace at which we're developing our people and providing them with those upskilling, those upskilling opportunities to develop their ability further, to widen and broaden and deepen their industry knowledge. So I think that to me, I think would have the biggest impact on them as individuals.
And that's
it's interesting. We often have assessors who are working with people at some rather cutting edge sites, and their apprentices are doing things the assessors have not yet done.
No,
and understand why that happens. But I'd much rather be in a position to really equip my training centres with the latest technologies and give them those upskilling experiences, which would allow them to deliver in those areas. But not just, of course, the assessors and the tutors. That's more broadly at everyone in every job. And how do we upskill? How do we offer people the opportunity to grow themselves and take opportunities that come with that?
If you had a leadership style that you could define, what would you define it as?
Oh, collaborative.
That's it, done.
I mean, yeah.
I work with people, and I work with people for the best outcome. Collaborative.
Yeah.
Couldn't get any simpler than that. If you had a standout role model, someone that you look up to, that you think is that person that you embody, who would that be?
A hybrid person made up of loads of different people. Everyone I work for and I've looked up and admired as a leader, or I've not admired, people I've really disliked, and we all have those occasions. It's exactly that. I always look and go, well, what is it about you that I really like? And what should I never do again? So I think I've got no one idealistic leader. I think my leader is that very much that hybrid model of people. I've picked those traits. I mean, there's one person I work for I struggle to get on with. But, the one thing, the positive I took away from that person was when things went wrong, he very much always wanted to know what went wrong, not who did something wrong. And if anyone started to say, he's not interested. He genuinely wasn't. He just wanted to know what had gone wrong and what are we going to do to stop it going wrong in the future. I thought that was a very powerful message.
I call it blame is for children.
Yeah. I've
got no interest in blame. It's not he said, she said, you did that. It's what's the problem? How are we going to solve it? How do we stop it from happening again? Don't want to hear about blame.
No.
It's something children do. Well, it was his fault or her fault or their fault. No interest in that.
But a lot of people default to they want to know a name very quickly. And I took that away, and just the level at which he took that to really impressed me. And I thought, good.
I think Deloitte do something very similar. They've got a framework that essentially says you will not get punished for doing something wrong, but you will get punished for covering it up. And what it encourages is for you to go, I've made a mistake here. Can you support me? which encourages that culture of collaboration, working with people and solving problems, because there's no blame. If you come and tell us about it, we'll fix it together. If you cover it up, we will then blame you. And I think that just gives you that sense of support. And also, if you bring me a problem, I can fix it pretty quickly. I've probably seen it before. I'm sure in your 40 years, you've seen that problem. And so the quicker you bring it to me, the quicker I can solve it, the better the outcome is for everybody, right?
It is. And of course, it was very much an aviation approach as well. And I worked in military aviation. And the aim, you never want to go for a blame culture, because if people then hide things, what are you covering up? And so it's a hard one to balance, because, people do things wrong, which sometimes, are so wrong that they need to be dealt with. But at the same time, you need to encourage this very open acknowledgement of mistakes, so that we can learn what was the training lesson from that? What was the culture we are creating which enabled that mistake to happen? But what you never want is a culture where people hide mistakes. It comes back to where we earlier discussions about openness and being approachable. It's really important. Don't hide things, bring them out, have honest discussions. That's what I like to do with my board.
And at the moment, are you actively doing anything to develop yourself as a leader? Are you sat on any courses, programs, anything?
Not currently under any programs, but I'm doing it through other ways, taking on board positions in other areas, because that wider exposure to some of the, not just the sector issues, but how to manage and how to lead at that more strategic level. There's always stuff you can learn. And I've got to say, the chair of my board is very wise, has spent a lot of time in the field, and is a good source of advice and guidance, and inevitably I learn from that.
What would be your advice to any future leaders then looking to progress within education and skills?
I think that, and I look amongst my leadership team at the moment and say, you're all future leaders further up within this organisation or within other organisations as well. So I think you've got to think very carefully about that style of leadership you want, and understand what you want to achieve, or what you want your learners to achieve as well in the environment you're in, and then the staff that you're leading. Because if you want to get up, and you've got to look broadly enough, not to think, to think across the breadth of an organisation and the different skill sets required and the different levels of ability required within each organisation. So if you want to achieve, understand that, and work very hard on thinking about your leadership style and skills and what works.
Start perfecting it now.
I don't think you can ever stop learning about leadership. It's not one of the things, and it's not an intrinsic thing. It might be with one or two people, a natural instinct, but probably not. I think, it's something that's learnt, and you can always keep learning throughout your working career.
Lifelong students. And looking forward then, what are some of the challenges you think that senior education leaders are going to face in the near term?
I think there are so many challenges that senior education leaders are going to face as we're coming up. The first one is finding sufficient people to deliver the training. The pool of specialist knowledge is quite small.
And shrinking.
And whilst we and the same across the sector pay good salaries for tutors, for assessors, those people as electricians have to be qualified electricians, and we are not paying as much as they do on a site. We offer a different lifestyle, and it can be very attractive to people, but we've got a small pool of people and I think that's going to be one of the big challenges. I think there is the dichotomy we're seeing with what the government's saying and what's happening in the skills landscape, and some of the contradictions that's bringing out and the challenges that's bringing out. I think that is going to be a difficult one for us to wrestle with. I think the general lack of money to support skills and to the degree they need to be supported. So I think, it goes across the range. How do you deal with there's some difficult policy areas to deal with? There's a fiscal environment, which is not great. And then there's a staffing environment, which is really challenging. And I think the three of them make for compromises and challenges which aren't always as palatable. I mean, if you just basically look at the funding staying static for all this year, so the funding has reduced effectively with inflation, but the demands from the Department for Education, which went from when the rules first came out, I think 14 pages of fiscal rules, they're now gusting on 150 pages of rules, and then the demands from Ofsted as well. Those are just increasing, and they're not increasing incrementally. They seem to be exponential in the way they approach and change rules and put more and more constraints on. And I think it just makes life extremely difficult. It can be, for some, it can be quite disheartening.
I think the government's fundamentally forgotten that education is investment. I think it sees at the moment education as a cost, and it doesn't recognise that if we invest in our workforce, we invest in our economy, the outcome is higher GDP per capita. It is the ability to rake in more taxes. If they can invest now and put more money into skills and training, which increases the quality of the provision, they will see in, 10, 20, 30 years potentially, that investment pay dividends. But the rhetoric I hear is that it's a cost and it's a budget line. It's not an investment, say, buying a nuclear power centre. Right, that's an investment, but investing in our training is no longer an investment. And it sounds to me like JTL are capturing some of the recognition that the better quality of the provision, the increase in the investment in the UK economy, and it feels to me that you are trying to build that real engine of growth.
And you also look at you got those challenges from government when we took skills away from the previous department.
Yep.
And brought them into DfE, I could see the reasoning behind that. And it used to be the Department for Education and Skills, and then it broke out into business and then has come back. But I'm not sure the recognition of the difference of skills to education is quite there yet still. So, in education, it's generally a good initiative applies to all schools, generally. Whereas in skills and education, we're sectoral. And I think that sectoral difference is not always as well appreciated as it might be. And a concrete example of that is bringing in short form apprenticeships or the foundation apprenticeships. Foundation apprenticeships will work in certain sectors. Retail will be a great one where it could work. Entertainment, in terms of that side of the economy. I can see how that foundation apprenticeship would work. But in our sector, absolutely not.
It's that real world experience that they need to get to grips with, meeting those different challenges and learning that over a period of time.
Absolutely. So you need to develop, in line with the industrial strategy, sector relevant policies, not think these few are one size fits all. How do you do that? And how do you gear up a department to do that? It's not straightforward. Hopefully Skills England will have the answer.
Thanks so much for your time there, Chris. We've been through so much around yourself, your own journey, the culture at JTL, what makes JTL so special. I think anyone who's listened to this has learned quite a lot and then learned quite a lot about your leadership. So thank you, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.